Hi everyone! Thank you for attending our webinar. I'm Nicola Mullaney and I'm the FBA Manager here at Shapiro. Before we begin, here's a little background on who we are and why we're qualified to guide you through the labyrinth we call global logistics. Shapiro is a third-generation family business that has been serving the shipping community for over 100 years. We place a strong emphasis on compliance and technological solutions, and we have an even stronger stance on customer service. We provide top-tier logistics solutions with a personalized approach. We love to get to know our clients and find ways to help them optimize their businesses. We've been working alongside Amazon for over 7 years, both with the Amazon-owned goods and the Fulfillment by Amazon program. Shapiro currently provides customs clearance and freight forwarding services for FBA sellers in the US, Canada, the EU, and Japan. We offer a hands-on and informative approach to first-time importers to help ease the learning curve. As you're about to find out, there's a lot to be aware of, and we're here to help you navigate through the wonderful world of importing. The purpose of this session is to help you streamline and optimize your supply chain, with a focus on the aspects of the importing industry that newbies tend to overlook. We'll journey along the supply chain to touch on the most important aspects, which are sourcing, choosing a freight forwarder and customs broker, and general tricks of the trade. Today's focus will be on importing to the US, but many of the principles can be applied internationally. We'll discuss ways to avoid some common mistakes, as well as how to ensure that your supply chain is consistent and scalable. We'll start at the beginning by talking a bit about product sourcing and building supplier relations. From an importing perspective, there are certainly a few things to be aware of when you're sourcing a product and a supplier. First, you need to make sure that you're sourcing from a reputable factory. There are plenty of services out there, such as Alibaba, that allow you to read supplier reviews. If your supplier has never exported to the US before, it's likely that you'll need to be more involved in ensuring that they provide the proper documents for both import and export clearance. Choosing a supplier that knows what they're doing when it comes to exports will save you time and headaches. It's also important that your supplier understands what it takes to make their products compliant with regulatory bodies such as the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Finding out that your goods have been detained because of the lead levels in your children's toys failing inspection is certainly not a good way to start building your e-commerce business. If your supplier tries to tell you that US Customs doesn't need certain information that your broker is requesting, or that you can claim a lower invoice value than what you actually paid, do some more investigating before committing to a purchase order. As the importer, you are ultimately responsible for the shipment and not the supplier. Next, you want to make sure that the product you're interested in is actually allowed into the US, or whichever country you wish to send goods to. Furthermore, you want to know which other government agencies may regulate your product. US Customs are not the only ones interested in imports. There's the Food and Drug Administration, the US Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Communications Commission, the Department of Fish and Wildlife Services, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which I mentioned earlier, just to name a few. You certainly don't want to get too far along in the process before realizing that you need a special permit, or worse, that your product is banned. As an example, we've recently seen sellers having to re-export items such as cosmetics because the importers did not do the proper research on their items and the FDA labeling requirements were not met. If your product makes any sort of claim regarding healing or curing, the FDA will consider this a medical device, and the appropriate registrations will be required for import. You should also be cognizant of intellectual property rights, as those certainly come into play when importing, and US Customs have recently taken an initiative to target violators more heavily. Any branded or trademarked products will require permission from the trademark holder if you wish to distribute them in another country. You don't want to have to quickly learn how to export all that Disney merchandise you spent so long trying to import. Being informed is key to avoiding costly mistakes, so do your homework and don't be afraid to ask your broker if something doesn't seem right. Once you've chosen a product and a supplier, you'll want to make sure that you understand under which terms you're paying your supplier. Incoterms, or terms of sale, play an important role in shipping, as they determine who is financially responsible for the goods at each step of the journey. I'll have more on Incoterms in a little while, as you'll want to know what the price you're paying your supplier includes. This is very useful when you are pricing out transportation, which leads me to our next segment on choosing the right mode of transport for your needs. So if you're new to FBA, most likely you'll want to test the market on your product prior to investing in shipping larger volumes. In most cases, using a small parcel courier, such as DHL or UPS, would be your best option. In general, if you're shipping less than 150 kilos of goods, and the commercial value is less than $2,500 US, a courier can handle this for you, no problem. However, if you have a high-value good, or if they are subject to regulation by another government agency, like the ones I mentioned earlier, the courier may require a customs house broker to get involved in the clearance portion of things while they still handle your delivery. That's really no problem, as we provide flexible logistics solutions that are built to fit a variety of FBA sellers' needs. If you're looking to ship pallets or even a full container, we've got you covered there too. Before you can even start to price out shipping, you'll need to head to Seller Central to find out where Amazon wants you to send your goods. There's a high likelihood that they want you to split the cargo up across several fulfillment centers, and sometimes that alone makes using a courier more economic. If you wish to avoid this, you can always opt in for Amazon's inventory placement program. In this program, Amazon will allow you to ship your goods to one warehouse instead of multiple, but there is a per unit fee for this. Once you know this cost, you can use this to perform a cost analysis of shipping directly to one warehouse versus shipping to multiple. When choosing a mode of transport, the two main factors to consider are volume and speed. How much freight do you want to send, and how quickly do you want to get it there? In general, courier shipments are going to be the cheapest and fastest method, but only up to a certain size. After that, your options are air freight or ocean freight, and for that, you need a freight forwarder who can properly route your freight and book space on a vessel or aircraft for you. So how exactly do you choose a reliable forwarder if you've never done this before? Well, this is a great question, as the quality of all the parties involved in your supply chain are equally as important. As Shapiro provides freight forwarding services, I'm obviously a little biased here, but in general, you want to look for a company that asks a lot of questions. The details matter, and if anyone is promising you otherwise, I'd think twice. If you're not a seasoned shipper, you'll want a forwarder who is experienced with new importers. Importing can be overwhelming and scary, and you want a company that's going to make it manageable for you, that will break down all the terminology and shipping lingo for you, and most of all, keep you updated, frequently. Like in many things, with shipping you will get what you pay for, so if you're looking for bottom-of-the-barrel rates, well, you can expect bottom-of-the-barrel service. Looking for a forwarder that also provides customs clearance will reduce the amount of paperwork and coordination on your side as well. If your forwarder can provide you with easy-to-understand charts and checklists, that's a good sign too. Shapiro has developed these for our clients to help keep them organized and to visualize the process. What you're seeing now is our shipment process flowchart. This graphic illustrates the steps you would take if you were using a forwarder service. It takes you from creating a shipment to accepting a freight quote to customs clearance and delivery. It's likely similar to the process most freight forwarders employ, however, this gives you an idea of what to expect in general. So once you've chosen your forwarder, it's time to decide the best method with which to ship your goods. As I mentioned before, there are two options, air freight and ocean freight. In general, air freight will be more expensive because you're paying for faster transit. There are direct and indirect flight options, which may present more flexibility from a cost perspective, but in general, you can expect to pay more for air freight. With ocean freight, you can use less than container load or full container load. We have some handy cheat sheets to help you out with container specifications on our website in the Resources Center tab. With LCL or less than container freight, your goods will travel along with other people's cargo, which is great as you can share the cost of the container. However, this mode does put you at more risk for customs exams, which I'll get into a little bit later. If you're able to get volume discounts from your supplier, and Amazon isn't limiting your inventory capacity, shipping a full container may be a way for you to decrease your cost per unit. Full containers come in several sizes, but the most popular are 20-foot and 40-foot boxes. In general, you'll need a volume of at least 20 cubic meters to make shipping a full container worth it. Once you know where the goods have to go, and have a rough idea of which method you'd like to ship by, then it's time to get a freight quote. Now that you've heard about all the ways to ship, let's talk about how to get pricing. As long as you're working with an experienced freight forwarder, They should be able to provide you with a few different quotes should you want to compare air versus ocean, speedy or slow service, that kind of thing. But perhaps you'd like to analyze the cost-benefit of utilizing Amazon's inventory placement program, which lets you pay to prevent Amazon from splitting your cargo. Well, then you'd want to ask for a quote based on this scenario as well, as it may present a cost savings on the logistics side of things. Keep in mind, Amazon may still transship your goods to multiple fulfillment centers before making them readily available in the marketplace. To get started with freight quoting, you'll need to know where your forwarder will be collecting the goods, and that depends on your terms of sale or Incoterms. For example, if you're buying on FOB terms, that's free on board, then your supplier is handling taking the goods to the nearest port and clearing export customs for you. If your terms are Ex Works, the supplier relinquishes responsibility once the goods are packed, and it will be up to you to get them picked up from the factory and exported. You'll also need to know the number of cartons you wish to send, as well as their weight and dimensions. Amazon has very specific receiving requirements, and it's imperative that you work with your supplier and forwarder to ensure that the goods are configured on the correct pallets to make sure the delivery happens properly. In our experience, most overseas suppliers are unable or unwilling to follow Amazon's instructions. So by now you might be thinking, sure, I understand that you need a lot of information, but how soon can my goods get delivered to Amazon? In order to determine when your goods can be available for your customers, you need to consider a few different factors. While forwarders can provide you with port-to-port transit times, there are a few elements of the import process that can cause delays. You'll need to consider that customs and other government agencies may hold your cargo for document review or even physical examination. This may cost you a few days, as well as a few dollars, depending on the type of exam performed. As a new importer, it would be wise to cushion a few days into your lead time to allow for an exam. More on that in just a little while. Another factor outside of your control is the delivery date. Amazon designates the appointment, and there is really no way to change that. It's advisable that if you have urgent freight that you let your forwarder know as soon as possible. We'll touch on the specifics of the delivery process a little later. Another factor will be the cargo ready date, and that will depend entirely on your supplier. Each quote we provide will indicate the departure frequencies for the mode of transport that you chose. For most ocean freight, there's 1 or possibly 2 weekly sailings. Your cargo must be ready several days before the sailing date in order to make the vessel. So when you're planning your lead times, you need to consider this as well. The earlier that you let us know about delivery deadlines, the better we can help you to make them. And speaking of deadlines, it's important to be aware that most freight quotes are only valid for 30 days. That's ocean freight quotes. Rates are always fluctuating, so if your cargo is not ready by the time the quote is expired, we'll need to update the rates. Depending on the time of year, you could see some savings, but if it's peak season, you could see increased cost. Air freight rates are much more volatile, so the quotes are valid for even less time. Also, you need to understand that if you're quoted delivery, those rates may expire by the time the shipment is actually ready to go to Amazon, and forwarders can't always control that. The trucking market is becoming more and more unpredictable, and while we do everything in our power to stabilize the rates, you as the importer do need to understand this premise and plan for it. We're here to help you do just that. So now that you've got logistics covered, it's time to get ready for customs clearance and the fun of all that paperwork. Whether you're a U.S. resident or not, Amazon will not act as the importer of record for Amazon shipments, which leaves you, as the FBA seller, fully responsible for complying with U.S. Customs and other agencies' regulations. Non-residents can certainly act as the importer of record for shipments into the U.S. Importing should be looked at as a privilege and not as a right, and although it can be tedious at times, all importers must be willing and able to provide any information that Customs or another agency requires. In order to act as the importer of record, the first thing you'll need to do is to purchase a U.S. Customs bond. The bond, at its core, is essentially U.S. Customs' way of ensuring that they receive payment for the duties and taxes on all imports. In general, we discourage the use of one-time or single-entry bonds, as it generally is not cost-effective and dramatically slows down the clearance process. Bonds are required for all sea freight shipments, even if the value is under $2,500. If you ship with an air courier, in most cases a bond is not required. However, there are exceptions, so we always suggest checking with us before shipping anything. Along with the bond, you'll need to provide us a power of attorney to enable the broker to perform customs business on your behalf. And most forwarders and brokers will also require that you agree to their terms and conditions by signing an agreement. Finally, it may be wise to apply for credit with your logistics partners to avoid paying up front for your entire shipment. After the initial onboard paperwork is completed, it's time to take a look at the commercial documents that pertain to your specific shipment. When you import to the U.S., you must declare the true commercial value of the goods that you are intending to sell. Customs are very good at figuring out when merchandise is declared with too low a value, so please ensure that your supplier is invoicing you for the actual cost of goods sold. Customs is not interested in your retail price. As the importer, you're held accountable for the shipment, so any problems with the clearance will be your responsibility, not the supplier, not the forwarder, and sometimes not even the broker, so it's very important to trust the partners that you're working with. The commercial invoice and packing list have several requirements, and it's best to be as transparent as possible, as now, through the glory of technology, Customs will be able to see your actual invoice rather than just data that's input by your broker. Ensuring that you have clear descriptions of your goods, and even photos, is one way to minimize the risk of a customs exam. Exams are generally the result of a random inspection, or when Customs isn't quite clear on something on your paperwork. Some of the data elements required on commercial documents are the country of origin, the terms of sale or Incoterms, the actual manufacturer's name and address, the gross and net weights, and the currency used on the invoice. Don't be surprised if we ask a lot of questions about your documents. We're just trying to make sure that everything is entered accurately and in compliance with Customs regulation. We promise we're not trying to create more work for you. While we're on the topic of proper documentation, you'll want to note that on all master cartons, the following data should be printed on the outside. You want the carton count, the gross and net weights, the country of origin, and any tracking labels such as your FBA shipment labels. Boxes without these markings may be subject to markings holds at arrival, which will create more of a clearance delay. If you're shipping on wooden pallets, you also need to ensure that they are properly fumigated and stamped, otherwise the USDA could refuse entry. So just how much are customs duties and taxes going to run you? Well, that really depends mainly on the commodity, but also on a few other factors, including the country of origin. Where your goods are actually made, and not just shipped from, will determine if they're eligible for any free trade agreements, or subject to trade regulations like anti-dumping duties. Anti-dumping duties are very high duties placed on foreign goods that have been priced below fair market value. You certainly want to be aware of these before committing to that product. A good example of this would be colored pencils from China. Now that adult coloring books are so popular, colored pencils are in high demand. However, most will be subject to 114% duties, which could really throw you for a loop if you weren't prepared to pay that much. We encourage you to research duty rates with your broker prior to placing an order so that you can work with these costs and make them into your bottom line. Duty rates can be complex, and you want a licensed customs broker classifying your products for you, not just a random website. Most articles have low or zero duties, but some, including textiles, can run as high as 20 to 30%. Again, quite a lot of details may be required in order to provide you with the correct duty rate. Now, I've been mentioning customs exams throughout this session, as they are an unfortunate reality when it comes to importing. You may ask yourself, why would my freight be flagged for an exam? Well, to be honest, Customs does not disclose the examination information to the trade community due to national security risks. But what we do know is that elements such as the shipper, the importer, tariff number, and the country of origin are all taken under analytical consideration. Although some examinations are completely random, there is a track record that follows you in your supply chain. If you are a first-time importer, Customs will likely examine your first few shipments in order to establish credibility. If you're a repeat offender of marking or labeling issues, for example, be aware that you will now be under Customs microscope. There are several types of exams. X-ray exams are usually the least invasive and generally take place within 2 to 3 days of arrival. Then you have a tailgate exam, where Customs will open the container and take a look but won't open any of your actual boxes. These exams can take a little bit longer. Intensive exams are the most invasive, as Customs will go through and open boxes and look directly at your merchandise. Exam times vary from port to port and also depend on how busy the customs staff are. So unfortunately, there's no standard, and we recommend building in a cushion of at least a few days into your plans and then being diligent with your customs requirements and hoping for the best. Remember, the main reason for exams is protection, so while it can be frustrating and costly, it is all for good reason. We have a great blog post that goes into even more detail about exams right on our website. Speaking of costs, I bet you're wondering what these exams are going to run you, right? Well, it varies. It depends on the port, the type of exam, and the amount of freight. Simple exams can cost as little as $50, whereas intensive exams can be in the thousands if you have a full container. The other cost to be aware of is storage. You would think that the ports and the carriers would be understanding when customs or another agency holds your freight for an exam, but you'd be wrong. There are some cases where you'll be charged demurrage, which is better known as storage, even though you have no control over the fact that your cargo is unable to be picked up. It is unfair, but it's a fact, and that's why we want to prepare importers for this unfortunate reality. As importers, you are responsible for the costs associated with an exam, and Customs does provide a regulation that spells this all out. It's the Code of Federal Regulations, number 19, USC 1467, and it states that Customs and Border Patrol have a right to examine any shipment imported into the U.S., and it is important to know that you as the importer must bear the cost of such cargo exams. The importer shall bear any expense involved in preparing the merchandise for customs examination and in the closing of packages. So here we are. Your goods have traveled halfway around the world. They've made it through customs, and now they just have to make it through to the Amazon door. It's wise to understand how these deliveries work, as that will allow you to identify events that may cause delays. Once the freight arrives, it'll clear customs, and as long as there's no delay on release, such as an exam, we'll send a carrier in to pick it up right away. If you're shipping with us, we'll have set everything up for quick release, but if you're using another forwarder, make sure that they've taken care of all of their responsibilities so that you can get your freight collected as soon as possible. More on that in just a minute. Keep in mind that during peak delivery times like the holidays, sometimes Amazon's appointments are given as far as 2 weeks out. It's not ideal, but it's understandable considering how much freight they are dealing with during those surges. Just this year, they'll be opening 18 more warehouses in the third quarter just to take care of all that holiday volume. It's imperative that you plan your holiday shipping with this in mind, as well as Amazon's holiday deadlines, which are generally 3 weeks prior to the actual holiday. For example, last year, December 4th was the deadline for Christmas. If you're shipping less than container freight or full container and not small parcel with a courier, please account for the time needed to rework your freight onto the proper pallets once it clears customs. Our warehouse partners work as quickly as possible, but it's good to have an understanding of what actually needs to happen to your freight before it's ready. Amazon requires that most freight is delivered on 48 by 40 inch pallets with a height restriction of 72 inches and a weight limit of about 1,500 pounds. If you have multiple FBA shipment IDs, these can't be commingled on the same pallet. For the full scope of Amazon's requirements, please contact us directly or check Seller Central. Unless you're shipping a full truckload or you've elected for expedited trucking, your shipment will travel as LTL, which means less than truckload. Just like LCL ocean freight, your goods will be consolidated inside a 53-foot truck with other people's cargo. So what does this mean for you? Well, if your cargo is not the first stop on the delivery route, there's a chance that delays at other stops may cause the driver to miss the Amazon appointment. Amazon warehouses all operate under the same strict set of rules. However, ultimately, it is up to the manager on site to make final decisions in terms of accepting or rejecting your delivery. We've seen Amazon accept late deliveries when given notice, but we've also seen them reject it for just being a few minutes late. While we respect their process, it is something for importers to be aware of, as it's something as benign as a flat tire on a truck could ultimately affect your product's availability. We need sellers to understand that these things happen and know that when they do, we'll work with our carriers to correct the situation as soon as possible. I'll be discussing a little bit more about what can go wrong in just a minute. However, for now I'd like to touch on deliveries that do not go directly to Amazon. While most sellers are sending cargo directly to Amazon, there may be some situations where you'll be sending the goods elsewhere. Maybe you want to ship in bulk, but Amazon's limited your inventory, so some of the goods need to go elsewhere. Maybe you want to send your goods to an inspection center prior to shipping to Amazon. In these cases, we'll need you to provide full receiving instructions for your ultimate destination. While we're well versed in Amazon's requirements, it's up to you to let us know how other warehouses need their deliveries handled. If you're not based in the U.S., we'll need the tax ID of the receiving location for customs clearance purposes. You'll need to check with them that this is okay, as not all other warehouses offer their tax ID for customs clearance. We'll also be asking whether or not they have a loading dock, if pallet jacks or other equipment is required. Will an appointment be necessary? Is this delivering to a residence? Well, if so, there's usually an additional fee. The details matter here, as we want to make sure that your non-Amazon deliveries go just as smoothly as the Amazon ones. So while we're on the topic, choosing where your goods are inspected is another vital link in your supply chain. Sending goods directly from the overseas supplier to Amazon can be scary, given that you have no real control over how the goods will turn up. There are a few different methods you can take to ensure that you're getting what you ordered and that your customers do too. You can start by asking the factory to send you a sample or two, or at the very least, photo verification of the finished and packaged product. This way, you can check to see if they've followed Amazon's requirements. If they are agreeing to palletizing the goods for you, you'll want to make sure that they follow the policies exactly, to eliminate the risk of your cargo being rejected. If you still want more verification, you can choose to ship to a third-party inspection center. There are plenty of them in the U.S., but that does build additional cost and time into your supply chain. Once you've had a few successful shipments, you can most likely eliminate these extra steps and streamline your operations while feeling confident that your customers are receiving the products exactly as you described them on your listing. So Murphy's Law, what can go wrong? Clearly, there are a lot of contingencies when it comes to importing. We certainly don't want to discourage anyone from importing, but we find it's a much smoother process with new importers when they're educated and aware of how the process works, as it gives them a chance to put together a well thought out plan, leaving much less room for disappointment and frustration. I'd like to take a moment to review some of the circumstances that we've seen new importers face that could have been less challenging had they known ahead of time what to expect. To circle back to the relationship with your supplier, it's important to lock down the terms of sale that you're working under and also the cargo ready date. Remember, freight quotes are only valid for so long, so you'll need to be in sync with your supplier on this. Nothing is as frustrating as delays that happen before the cargo even exports. You'll also want to understand how the exchange of ownership works. The bill of lading is a document that your supplier will release to you to transfer ownership of the goods after they've received your payment. For ocean freight, they can do this in two ways. The old school way, which means they issue original carbon paper documents that you need to then endorse and surrender directly to the ocean carrier before they'll release the cargo to the trucker. Or alternatively, they can issue an electronic release or a telex, so everything is handled digitally and no original documents are required. We highly recommend using the telex method as it's far less of a headache. Original bills of lading are difficult and costly to replace, so save yourself the hassle and ask your supplier to elect for the telex release. There's generally a small fee associated with this, but it's worth it. Be sure to know which method your supplier is going to use so that your broker has this information as well. Speaking of things that are costly to replace, how about the freight itself? Just what happens if the container falls overboard and your goods plummet to the bottom of the Pacific? If your goods are insured, you'll be able to recoup the money that you spent on the goods, as well as what you paid for the shipping. If not, well, you're out of luck. Most of the time, things go as planned, but once in a while, things can go awry, and you want to protect your investments by purchasing cargo insurance, which will allow you to sleep a little bit better at night. Cargo insurance is not going to reimburse you for lost sales, but it's much better than chalking it up to a total loss. Always check to see if your forwarders offer cargo insurance, as most of them do. So we've already covered a few of the things that might cost you extra, like exams, the subsequent storage charges that may follow, but storage charges can also occur when there are delays with the release of the bill of lading, or if another government agency wants to review your shipment after customs releases it. Storage is generally priced by volume, and usually gets more expensive the longer the freight sits. All the more reason to have all of your ducks in a row and avoid this hit to your bottom line. Another form of storage that applies only to ocean freight is known as per diem. When you ship a full container, you're renting that container from the steamship line. Once the freight gets to the U.S. and the container leaves the port for delivery, the steamship line wants that empty box returned quickly. If the container is dropped at Amazon's facility and Amazon takes their time to unload it, the steamship line will charge a per diem fee on the container as well as the chassis that it sits on. Amazon won't be responsible for these charges, so we recommend transloading the goods out of the ocean container, palletizing the freight before delivery so that the container can go straight back to the depot. Per diem can cost you hundreds of dollars per day, so it really can add up. It's also not a cost that you're necessarily factoring into your bottom line, unlike the cost of transloading and palletizing, which would be presented to you at the time that you get a quote. So, while we're on the topic of delivery-related charges, we wanted to shed some light on the trucking market for you. As I mentioned earlier, when you're getting freight quotes, the delivery rates should be included, but by the time the cargo actually reaches the U.S., those rates may not be valid. In most cases, the cost remains the same, but recently the market has become a little more volatile. You may recall the labor strike that happened on the West Coast last year, and certainly this had an effect on domestic trucking. Thanks to some poor infrastructure planning, the U.S. ports just can't handle the volume of cargo entering the U.S., and the backlog can be catastrophic at times, as it was last year. The woes of the truck drivers made national news last summer, as you might remember hearing stories about how the congestion was causing drivers to lose money. Drivers get paid by turns, and when there's congestion, they simply can't make many turns per day as they're stuck in long lines at the pier. The only other way these drivers can continue to earn a fair wage, given that circumstance, is to charge for wait time, much like a taxi driver charges you when you're stuck in traffic. In general, drivers will allow 1 to 2 hours at port pickup in Amazon's warehouse before they will charge an hourly rate for their time. This charge is known as detention. It's generally about $85 an hour, but it does vary by carrier. There's 2 types of unloading procedures that the carriers provide. One is a live unload, where the driver will stay with the cargo until Amazon finishes unloading, and this is where detention is most likely to come into play. The other option is a drop delivery, where the driver drops off the load and returns another time to pick up the empty container or trailer. This option involves 2 trips, so it's going to cost more, but it does minimize the likelihood of unplanned detention charges. So when you're setting up your shipment in Seller Central, you'll notice that Amazon provides 3 options for delivery type: small parcel, or SPD, LTL, less than truckload, or FTL, full truckload. Small parcel is the only to be used if you're using a company like DHL or UPS to send small, loose boxes. Amazon does provide preferred carriers for less than truckload and full truckload, and you're free to use those for delivery. However, these arrangements would be your responsibility, and if you're not familiar with the process, it may be a little bit of a headache for you. Each year, Amazon publishes a calendar of deadlines for the holiday season. It's generally about 3 weeks prior to the actual holiday, and as you can imagine, there's a mad rush to get freight into the warehouse at this time. We can't stress enough that you need to allow yourself ample time to get your freight in for these peaks. Wait time for appointments can be as long as 2 to 3 weeks. We do recommend that if you're worried about running out of stock, you can supplement your freight shipments with small parcel deliveries with a courier service. After the holidays, another peak time for shipping will be the end of January, prior to the Chinese New Year holiday. If you're going to be sourcing in China, you need to be aware of this week-long holiday where there will not be any aircraft or vessels departing from China. You may also probably not be able to communicate with your supplier either. The few weeks leading up to this holiday create a high demand for cargo space, which drives the prices up and allows carriers to have all the control over what sails and what gets left behind. The big players like Apple, Samsung, and Walmart usually buy up a lot of this space and therefore have an advantage over everyone else. There's also the risk that the carriers will roll your booking to the next sailing to make space for these big guys. The moral here is proactivity. So hopefully by now you've received the message that being prepared will help you avoid costly mistakes, and that partnering with the right providers will help to ensure your imports and exports are handled with the precision and care that they deserve. Today we discussed things to consider when choosing a container and a forwarder, as well as the different modes of transport. We reviewed the requirements for customs clearance and also learned about the delivery process as well as some of the things that are out of your control. Your knowledge on these topics will help you to avoid some of the common pitfalls that new importers face and allow you to successfully develop your e-commerce business. This concludes today's webinar, and I'd like to thank you for attending and I hope that this session has provided you with the knowledge that you need to get started or continue to build your FBA business. For additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you and best of luck.